missiles against Israel. This creates enormous problems for the Israelis and for the Americans. The Israelis will want to be assured that the Americans will take out these missile sites that are pointed towards Israel. They're skeptical that the Americans will do it and can do it quickly enough to satisfy them. The Israelis, on the other hand, would have trouble joining the Americans in an air war against these missile sites because the Americans have not been coordinating with the Israelis. And without coordination, two air forces in the air attacking the same targets leads to chaos. Also, if the Israelis go up against these Iraqi missile sites, they'll have to fly over or very near Jordanian airspace. This means that they might have to take out the Jordanian Air Force on the way. The only way that King Hussein can save his Air Force, the Israelis say, is to give them ironclad guarantees that in the event of hostilities, he will not scramble a single fighter against them, that he will not budge. If King Hussein does this, he could land in serious trouble with his own people, who are increasingly militant, increasingly pro-Iraq. So once again, King Hussein of Jordan is caught between Iraq and a hard place called Israel. He might have to choose between jeopardizing his Air Force and jeopardizing his throne.
Thanks, Bob. Coming up next, Charles Kuralt in New York with the rest of the day's news. I'll be back later in the broadcast with the first of two reports on the key question here, to fight or not to fight. News has made a special commitment to try to answer some of the fundamental questions for you, such as how did we get into this? What's likely to happen, and what are some of the consequences going to be? Tonight, the first of a two-part look at the case for and against the United States actually going into war. Our veteran combat correspondent, Richard Threlkeld, has prepared stories summarizing the two sides. Tonight, in the countdown to confrontation, the case for war.
War is a risky, bloody business, but those who make the case for going to war if Saddam Hussein doesn't get all of his troops out of Kuwait believe it is worth the risk and the casualties, because some things are worth fighting for, and history shows that fighting against aggression is one of them.
Like Hitler, Saddam Hussein will be at our throats in the future if he is given the opportunity to do so.
And those who are convinced America will have to fight him sooner or later believe sooner is better.
Now is going to be easier. Now is going to be cheaper. Now is going to be less bloody and devastating than later will be.
Especially if, as it appears, Iraq is close, maybe very close, to developing its own nuclear bomb. Henry Kissinger, for one, believes it may now become necessary to take military action to prevent that.
A country has been invaded, looted, 90% of its citizens expelled and replaced with hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. Thousands of foreign hostages have been held. That has established a level of ruthlessness which you don't want to marry with nuclear weapons also.
Besides, the argument goes, if we don't cut Saddam Hussein down to size, he'll be able to bully America's friends and allies throughout the Middle East and remain a persistent threat to its vital oil resources.
If the United States is perceived as having acted effectively against this bully, this tyrant, this genocidal megalomaniac, we will have far less problems.
And there are those who believe that in any case, war with Iraq may be unavoidable because President Bush has committed such a huge military force, upwards of 400,000 U.S. troops. If he orders them home without accomplishing their objective, the U.S. will wind up looking like a paper tiger.
This is dangerous.
I think it would lead to a collapse of American credibility, not only in that area, but in most parts of the world.
Plus, it's going to be next to impossible to keep all those U.S. troops in the Persian Gulf while we wait for the sanctions against Iraq to succeed. And when it comes to sanctions, there's no shortage of skeptics.
Nobody knows whether the sanctions will work. The history of sanctions is that the longer they're in place, the more they begin to fray at the edges.
So those who subscribe to some or all of those reasons argue that it may be, if Saddam Hussein doesn't back down, America will have to fight him because we can't afford not to. Tomorrow, we'll examine the other side, the case for staying out of a war with Iraq. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, New York.
And that's the news from our world tonight, 13 days before the deadline for Iraq to get out of Kuwait. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News, reporting from Saudi Arabia. We'll be reporting from here again tomorrow night as we continue our coverage of the countdown to confrontation. From an airbase somewhere in eastern Saudi Arabia, good night.
Evening, it is going to be a very